Hello everyone, I am Rod and I am the game design instructor for the Academy of Entertainment Arts over at Dixie Hollands High School. If you are one of my students, it's Mr. Flowers to you, and welcome to this video tutorial. What I'll be showing you today is how to create this wood texture that you see here in the game viewport of the Unreal Engine. This is created in Photoshop, and we will go over all the little intricacies of how to make this really pop. Let me jump over into that interface. I'm going to go ahead and nuke these old ones. Alright, and go over into Photoshop. I'm working in Photoshop CS 5.5, I believe. In the school, we have CS 6 or CS Cloud. For those of you at home, this should work on pretty much any version of Photoshop. I think all the tools are about the same right around now. I'm going to go to File. I'm going to create a new file. And I'm going to name it is, when you start naming these things, you want to make sure that you use appropriate naming conventions if you're working in some sort of 3D package such as Maya, or if you're working in a game engine like Unreal or Unity. Having a naming convention is really going to save your life, because as you're going through making all of these assets, you usually don't just have one asset. You've probably got hundreds or maybe even 1,000 different pieces inside of this package that you're going to be using for your game. So having a good naming convention is going to help you find what you're looking for, and not be searching around all day long trying to do whatever. So since we're making a texture, we're going to use T as our prefix, underscore, and then whatever the name is that we're going to name this particular item. In our case, we're making a wooden floor, so I'm going to say wood floor, and no spaces, but I'll use camel case. So wood and then capital F for floor. And then down here, make sure we're in pixels, because inches are really big. And 2048 is the size that I'm going to work with. You could use 4096, and if you have a computer or whatever that is capable of handling higher image sizes, you're more than welcome to. And I recommend, if you can, to utilize the largest image size that is stable for your computer and for your particular game build. Some of the older ones can't handle anything that's too big, and I think 2048 is a good size for most machines these days. The idea being, the more pixels that you have, the greater the pixel depth, the more quality you can put into the image, and then you can always scale that down. You can't scale it back up unless you're working with like vector images or something like that. Alright, so down here for resolution, 72 is usually for web viewing. You're more than welcome to keep it that way, or you can change it like 300 dpi or whatever the pixel depth is that you think is necessary to get the quality that you need for your work. For us, I think 72 is going to be fine, but again, that's up to you. The larger the resolution, the higher pixel width or density is going to make this a much heavier file, basically. It'll bump it up from a few kilobytes to a few megs. So all that you want to keep in mind when you're making a game. Alright, so once we have our canvas here, I'm going to go ahead and unlock our canvas, unlock our layer, just by double clicking. And I'm not going to name this just yet. I'm just going to hit OK. And when it opens up, it does give you this wonderful filled area of pixels. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to refill this with a new color. So if I come over to my color picker, I'm going to double click on the first one, bring this up. And since we're making wood, I want to have a couple different shades of brown. Brown is, for me anyway, I always find it right in here in between yellow and red at this little orange mark. And right about there is a good brown. If you want to use mine, the numbers are right here. You can always just steal that. Or you can find a brown of your liking, and I think this one's good for me for a dark brown. I'm going to go to the second color, open that one up, and I'm going to grab a lighter brown. Now, whenever you're working inside of a package and you want to make a texture of some sort, the more you do by hand, the better results you're going to get. It's going to take you longer, but the time is really worth it. What we're doing in Photoshop right now is we're going to go over a quick way of how to have this sort of auto-generated for us. And it's going to give us something we can work with, but it's not going to be perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Filter. And before we can get this to work, we need to make sure we have pixels here. Right now, we do. This is, of course, just a white background. But let's say this was cleared out and you had an empty canvas. If you tried to go and render the fibers to make the wood grain, Photoshop would scream at you. Oh, I'm CS 5.1. Photoshop would scream at you and say, hey, we can't do that. There's nothing here. We need information first. So what you have to do is come up, Filter, Render, and we're going to throw some clouds in there. And what this will do is it'll just randomly generate pixels for us of the two colors that we made. Now this isn't really all that important. Alternatively, we could have just filled it in with our bucket tool and achieved a similar result with what we're going to be doing. Because Photoshop doesn't care about the pixels that are here, it just needs something to work with. Now I'm going to go up to Filter and go down to Render, and I'm going to say Fibers. And here we go. So inside of our little Fibers palette, or generator, we have an option. We can click Randomize, and it'll give us different variations. And this looks like a pretty good wood grain texture. If you want to adjust like the vibrance, add more strands, more fibers, you're more than welcome to. You're the artist, so it's up to you. You can also bump up or change the strength to show how dark these lines kind of pop out. And you can again hit random and see what you get. I like what it looks like at 16 and 8. It's a good number for me. You can even change this down. Yeah, 16. I'm going to stick with 16. I'm going to hit this a couple times and see what I can come up with. This looks like it's fine. And hit OK. And there we go. Bam, you made a texture. Alright, now we could take this and drop it into a game engine and put it on like a wall or a door, but I don't want to stop right here. I want to do a little bit more. And if you look over in the game engine that I had set up, I had boards, and I want to make some boards. So what we can do, you can go Edit, come down to either Transform and Scale, or Free Transform, and it'll give you the ability to just change the size of this. And I'm going to draw this down to about here, about the size of a board. You can make these, skinnier or wider if you like, but I think this is a good width. And then I'm going to click the checkbox. Okay. Now what we can do, we need to make multiple boards, right? So you have an option. You can go up to Select All, Edit. You can do a copy and paste. You could come over to your layer, right click, click Duplicate Layer, or alternatively on the keyboard, you can hold down Alt, click on your layer, and drag, and it spawns a new one. Check that out. I'm just going to put this guy right about there. Now if you see it, if you get close to your other object, it snaps to it, which is really cool with Photoshop. But if you're wanting to do what I'm doing and you want to have like a space between your boards, then the snapping is going to be kind of annoying. You can turn that off, or you can use it to your advantage. In my case, I'm going to let it snap, and then on my keyboard I'm just going to hit the arrow key a few times and just space it out to right about there, wherever I like. If you've ever done carpentry, probably noticed that people are a little wonky when they make things, so it's not going to be perfectly spaced every time. Just there's always human error, so a little bit of natural disorder is fine. If you space these boards out and they're not perfectly even, don't worry about it. I'm going to go ahead and hold down Alt, click and drag, and make a new board, and snap this one here, and then I'm going to lift it up, and that's fine. Now it's kind of cool, but when you do this and you make a new one, you're actually making a new layer, right? So if you want to go back and edit your other boards and you try to click on them, you notice they don't move. Just this one moves. Well, this is the last layer created, and it always chooses the top layer. So if you want to go back to your other boards, you're going to have to go in order of their layers. So if I want my first board, I have to go to my first layer. And now I can edit this board. Okay. Second board, second layer, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go back up to my top layer, and I'm going to put this board right about here. Now if you want to, if you look at the top here, you see that this pattern is the same as this pattern, and naturally so, right? It's the same board. If you wanted, you could create a whole new layer and make a whole new board. You can go layer, filter, render. Remember, you got to fill it with pixels, and then you got to do your fibers. Edit, free transform, and it's really good about snapping into about the size of the last board, so it's good. That way there's different styles. It's not the same board over and over and over again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete my last one. Okay. Oops. See, I'm grabbing the wrong layer there. I'm going to put this one here. And you can do that for each board. You can manually create a different randomized texture for each one. That way it's not the same pattern repeated over again. And I think I'll do that. I think I have this one, this one. Let me go and grab this guy. I'll delete him off. The top one, I'll put this up here. Right? And then I can take this, make it a long board. And I'm going to just go ahead and rotate this. That way I don't have this blotchy edge at the top. I'm going to go Edit, Transform, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate 180 degrees. You could do a horizontal flip, which would flip this edge with this edge, and this edge with that one. Or you can do a rotate, which will, of course, rotate this edge to down here, and vice versa. And I'm going to do a rotate. And you see? I just rotated it around. From here, I'm going to go ahead and grab my board, drag this off, and I'm going to make my next board pattern. And snap this. I actually want to create a new board, so create a new layer down here in the Layers tab. Filter, Render, Clouds, Filter, Render, Fibers, and I'll randomize. Edit, free transform. I'll drag it this way this time. There we go. Alright, I'm going to drag this guy up. And even though it's kind of random, it's still got this spine. You can look at all these, they all sort of have that spine thing going on. I'm going to flip this one around too. So in this case, I'm just going to do a horizontal flip, just so you can see it work. Think. You're like, wow, that did a whole bunch. Actually, that was the wrong one. I want to do a vertical flip. So I will do a vertical flip. There we go. Alright, so now that I have my floor kind of mapped out, what I want to do is I want to make these little spaces in between all my cracks, I want to darken those up. I want to give this the illusion that there's depth there. And I'm going to create that by making a shadow under here, basically. So I'm going to click on my layers, select or hit Shift, and come down and grab the bottom one. What this will do is it'll grab all of them. If you only want to grab a couple layers, let's say you want to merge this layer and this layer together, you can hold down Control and it'll let you select which layers you want. For our case, we want all of them, so I'm going to click and click. Don't forget, click, hold Shift. Yeah. Right click, merge layers. Okay. So what we can do here, we can do a number of different things. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to pull this down because whatever we create in our layer, it always appears on top, right? I want this layer to appear on the bottom. I'm going to come over, make sure that I have my darker of the two browns selected, grab my bucket tool. And if you don't see your bucket, you probably have the gradient tool over here. Let's go ahead and click and hold on the gradient tool, grab your bucket. Make sure your layer is selected and just drop it in. And there we go. Instant floor. We could take this right over into the game, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate these, or sorry, I'm going to merge these together, and then I'm going to save our work. Remember, always to save smart, save often. So I'm going to save this PSD file, and what the Photoshop file allows us to do is if we have multiple layers in here that we want to come back and modify, it'll save those layers, and you can come back and modify them, of course. But what I want to do before I bring it to the game engine is I want to compress these. I want them all to be one file. So I'm going to go up File and Save Again, and I'm going to name this T_wood_floor D. And what that D is, that's for diffuse. Our diffuse color, or our diffuse channel, is our color map, basically. It's got all of our color information, all of our texture or pattern information on here. A lot of times you can bake, and bake just means to save, artificial shadows, artificial lighting into your texture if you wanted to, and that would all kind of show up in your diffuse. Now if you're using like a normal map or whatever, you wouldn't bake your shadows in there, because then you would use lighting information from your normal. Anyway, I'm going to come down, and I want to save this as a Targa. And Targa is a little bit nicer than a JPEG. They're not as blotchy. And it's a really good format to use, and Unreal is happy with it. I don't think Unreal will use a JPEG. They do allow Photoshop files to be used now, though. But this is also smaller than your PSD file. It gets compressed. So go ahead and save. And I'm going to say OK. And then 24-bit is fine. Once that's saved, hop over to Unreal and navigate to your file that has, or your folder, which has your textures in it. So I'm looking for T_wood floor, D for diffuse, and just drag it into our content browser. Give it a second. There we go. So to make this into a material, go ahead and click on it, right click, go up to Create Material, and then once this pops up it gives you a chance to name it. I'm going to leave it as the current name by default and just click off, and it will take a second to render that. Come on you. There we go. And now, let me back up, we can just take this and drop it onto our floor. Ta-da! Instant flooring, right? Looks pretty cool, but if you look real close, you'll see some problems. For instance, right here, there's a nasty seam. This doesn't line up. We don't want that. When we create textures, and a good texture artist, you want to make sure that you are making these so when they tile, that means when they line up next to each other, you can't see it. You want it to be seamless. You want this to look like a series of boards that somebody put down and it's just one board after another. You don't want these weird splits in here, because that breaks the illusion that it's real. And if you look at this board, you can see that these ones don't line up either. That's broken. That's no good. This board over here has this weird cut halfway through. And sure, there's bad carpenters, but come on, nobody's going to botch up their floor that badly, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into Photoshop, And we have to fix this. So to do that, what you want to do first is to select all, and then go to Image, Crop. And the reason I'm cropping, and I will back up just so you can see. Dink, dink. The reason I'm cropping is if I don't, oops, go ahead and blend those back together. If I don't, and I pull this out, there's these extra half boards kind of hanging there. And we don't want those. Those are just going to be in our way when we go to modify this. So select all, Image, Crop, and that'll take away all those extra bits that are outside of our viewport. Now if you need to deselect, let's say you have a selection box and you haven't figured out how to deselect, you can just click off your canvas, or you can go to Select, hit Deselect. Alright, now that I have this, I'm going to make what's called, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Go up to Filter, and go up to Other, Offset. And what this will do is it'll shift the image just a little bit. In our case, I'm going to change this back to 0. It should be 0, 0 by default. Sometimes it's a little bit different. You want to know how big your image is. Ours is 2048 pixels. If you think of this image kind of like a soda can, where this wraps around, this edge, meets this edge. And we want it so that we can see what happens when this edge and this edge line up together. So if I scroll this, you can see how this sort of shifts it and wraps it around. But it's hard on the eye if you just kind of shift at random. But if you know the image size, what you can do is just split the image in half. So I know that 2048 is 1024 when you split it in half. So this is halfway through my image, and it wrapped this corner, or this edge, that was over here all the way around, and this one that was over here came this way. And they meet right there on the center line. So for my eye, it's easy for me to find this center line, knowing right here is where my errors are going to be. If I chose an arbitrary number like 125, then I have to look around and kind of figure out and estimate, oh, 125 is about here, So 1024, that's our center line. And you can see this is where that one board is kind of wonky. So we have this weird cut. What we can do, hit OK. Come over and grab your darker of your two shades. Grab your paintbrush. And we're just going to manually paint in a new space between our boards. So you can right-click. Make sure you have the solid brush. If you have the this little fuzzy brush here, this transparent brush, it won't make a solid cut. You see how the edges are real soft? We want this to look like we just cut this board, right? So right-click, grab your solid brush, and then just mess with your sizes here to make sure that your brush size fits your grout line. It doesn't have to be perfect because, again, the spacing might be a little bit different from board to board, which is fine. A little bit of natural chaos is okay. I'm going to go ahead and click, and then I'm going to hold Shift and just move up and down, and that'll draw me a straight line. Look at that. Instant fixing, right? So I'm going to go back up to Filter, hit Offset again, and that'll set us back to 0. Filter, Other, Offset to bring up my menu, and I'm going to go ahead and set this guy to 0. That's where that's our origin point, and then we're going to change this in the height. So 1024, and here's that other ugly seam that we have to fix. So there are a few ways we can go about this. First, this board we can just split along this seam and create a whole new edge. which is what I'm going to do. To zoom in, hold Control on the keyboard and push plus or minus to kind of get in so you can see. I'm blind, so this helps. So I'm going to click, hold Shift, cut a line. On this board, I'm going to click, hold Shift, I'm going to cut a new line. Okay. Now this board right here, I don't want to cut a line, because if I do, I'll have this weird half section board that doesn't make any sense. So what I'm going to have to do is blend this together so it looks like it's one board. And we can do that using our clone stamp tool. So we're under our paintbrush here, click on it. You have two. You have pattern stamp and you have clone stamp. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my clone stamp. And if you hold Alt on the keyboard, you'll see it makes this little crosshair looking thing. Go ahead and click. That'll take a sample of your material. And you can just click and paint. You can see that? Paints from our sample. And you'll notice as you go through that you'll have to pick different samples as you go. So I'm going to pick a new sample, go ahead and paint. And if I zoom in here, you can see there's a little bit of an error. I ended up painting the edge over it, and sometimes you'll have that. So I'm just going to kind of go through and fix as I go. Just taking different samples. Take this sample over here. And you can kind of see where your little crosshair is. Like if I click and then I click to drag, you can see the crosshair up at the top where it's sampling. And as you draw, it's going to basically draw what's next to it, and it's going to move and try to catch some sample pieces to kind of draw with it. And that's what happens when I go too far to the left or to the right or too close to one of these seams. That little plus sign is catching the seam. Like if I get down here where the seam was, it would draw that. If I click here and then I draw out, when that plus sign gets to the edge, see how it's starting to draw that edge now? So that's what you're looking at. That's why that does that. So just be aware of that as you're coloring. And I'm going to grab another piece. I'll grab this section over here. Grab that. Oops. Okay. So that's one board. And come over to the next board. And this one also has that weird seam, and we don't want to split it here because we'd have this weird small board piece, and we don't want that. So again, I'm just going to grab some sample pieces. I'm going to change my brush size so I can work a little bit quicker. Grab this sample. Oh, that's a little bit too close to the edge there. I'll grab this one. All right. You notice I did end up filling in a little bit here and on this edge. So I'm going to go back and just adjust that. So I'm going to grab my paintbrush, make sure I have my darker color on, grab my solid brush, and from here, I'm just going to click, hold Shift, up and down. Sorry for jumping the screen. That's just to shave that edge a little bit. The same thing here. Click, hold Shift. Okay. Control, minus, minus. And there. Can't really even tell that these were different boards at one point in time, right? Like here, it looks like somebody just kind of sanded a little too hard, but that should work. And we can check our seams again. Filter, offset, just set it back to center. And it looks like it should work. So go ahead and File, go ahead and save your work. Then File, Save As. We're going to change this again to our diffuse. _D for diffuse. And then T on the drop down for Targa. Save it. I'm going to jump into Unreal. Click on our texture, right click, and then re-import. Remember, you're re-importing the texture file, not the material. And there we go. Looks like a floor. All the individual boards. Now there's still some repeating going on, and you can see this. Now this edge and this edge are kind of the same, and they repeat here. And you can always go back and clean these edges up so you don't have that repeated squiggly line. But for right now, I think that's good. You're more than welcome to go back and finish that piece. I want to show you one other thing before we wrap up the video. I'm going to show you how to make these boards kind of pop out. Right now, they're real flat. If we get to the edge, you can see that there's no depth in the board, right? So we're going to make it look like these boards are actually there. So if I go back into Photoshop, I'm going to create what's called a bump map. And all a bump map does is it takes a grayscale image and it uses anything that is white as a height and anything that is black as depth. So anything that's highlighted in white is going to pop off the page, and anything that's black is going to sink into the page or into the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the name of this by double-clicking on the name. And I'm going to say diffuse, because this is our color layer. Hold Alt on the keyboard, click our layer, drag. I'm going to name this one Bump. I'm going to turn off my top one by clicking the eyeball. And then I'm going to come over here to Image. And if we go to Modes, we have an option for grayscale, but if we hit grayscale, it'll actually tell us, hey, you're going to remove all the color information from all of your layers. We don't want to do that. So instead, we're just going to make one image black and white. So go down to Adjustments, and we're going to change our bump to black and white. Hit OK. Now what we want to do is ramp up the contrast so the system can see it a lot better. The way the bump map The way the bump map works is it takes the difference in your percentages of color. So the more contrast you have, the easier it is for the system to create that illusion of depth. So I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast. I'm going to ramp up the brightness. It's going to make our whites white. I'm going to bump up that contrast, and it's going to make our darks dark. Hit OK. And if I wanted to take this a step further, I could adjust the levels. So we can go into Image, Adjustments, Levels. And when this menu pops up, you can see there's a little bell here of where the lighting information is. So I'm going to grab this little dark arrow. I'm going to move this closer to the bell. And this is going to make our darks real dark. Grab the white one, move this closer. That's going to make the whites real white. And if you toggle with this one in the center, you can really see how these get pushed in and out. Now I don't recommend going to this one because it'll make little spikes on our board, and we don't really want that. It'll be too rough, I should say. I'm going to go about right there. I think that'll work just fine. I'm going to hit OK. Now if we use this, let's go File, of course save our work, File, Save As, T underscore wood floor, underscore B for bump map, and I'm going to say T inside of our drop down here to pull up Targa, hit Save, jump into Unreal, and I'm going to drop in my bump map. There we are. Now, unlike before, where we took our bump map, or when we took this one and made it into a material, we're just going to take this and add it to our current material. So go ahead and double click on your material. It'll bring up a material window. If you end up like me and this maximizes right away, go ahead and click this little square, minimize it, or shrink it down. That way we can drag and drop our items in. To navigate inside of here, you can right click and drag, and that'll pan you around. Middle mouse scroll zooms in and out, and left click and drag selects. Okay. Go ahead and drag in our map here. Oh, you didn't come in with me. There we go. Now set it right about there. And before I can go any further, I need to tell Unreal what I really want to do. And so I need a node that handles our bump map. So we type in our search box here, bump offset. And down here you'll see bump offset. We have a few different types. We just want the basic one. So grab bump offset, drag it in. And there we go. That's our little node. I'm going to go ahead and maximize now. And what I need to do is I need to take the output of this one and put it into the UVs of this guy. And UVs tell the system where to draw this image onto a piece of geometry. So go ahead and plug it in. It's going to give you an error, and the error just means, hey, I don't have any information to give this guy yet. So come over to your bump map, and you don't want to use the diffuse channel. That's the top one. We just want to use one of our color channels. Any one of these will work. I'm going to plug in the red right into the height. Give it a second. There we go. Now by default it has this sphere selected, but that doesn't work for our wood texture. We want to see how this works if it were flat. So I hit either a plane or a cube. And now we can see what it looks like when light hits this thing and it's a flat surface. And as you can see, it does push it off the page. Right here, you can see these boards kind of popping out, but it's causing a problem. It looks like there's two boards kind of split, hovering above each other, right? We don't want that. That means we have too sharp of a fall off between the edge of our board and then the darker space. So what we can do is we can soften this edge in Photoshop to give it a smoother transition. So come back into Photoshop, go up to Filter, come down to Blur, grab Gaussian Blur, and you can adjust your slider, and you might have to depending on how thick or thin or skinny your spaces are. For mine, 10 looks like it might actually be pretty good. We just want to soften the edges between here and here so that there's a little bit of graying from here and here, and then it's real dark in the middle. That way it's just a steady fall. It's like a little bell curve, basically. Hit OK. And I'm going to File, save my work, Save As, and again I'm going to go to _B for my bump map and grab my Targa. Hit OK. Jump back in. I'm going to minimize this, right click on my bump map, and go to re-import. Give it a second. Success, it's imported. So let's bring up our texture window. And if you look in here, you can see now that board pops off that page. See it? There's a little bit of distortion going on, but we can always fix that. So that board just jumps out. It's real cool. Now it's just an optical illusion. It doesn't really jump off the page. If we were to roll this to its edge, you can see it's flat. But it's only at the right angles, or at the correct angle, I should say, that these look like they are popping off that page. Down here by default, this is set to 0.05, and you might have to adjust it. If you see some sort of distortion going on and it's too heavy, just dial this down. You want to have the most amount of bump for your needs with the least amount of distortion. So let me see what happens if I dial this down to, say, 0.03. Oops. It's not bad. It doesn't pop out as far as I would like, though. I'm going to do 0.04. Okay. And if you notice you're still getting too much distortion, you might have to go back in and adjust the blurring on your image. You might have to make it sharper or more blurry. And then I hit the checkbox. I jump back into the game. Give it a second. There we go. And you can see our boards look like boards, right? They look like they're popping off. And if I jump into the actual play mode by hitting play, oops, there we go. Our boards look like they're boards, right? If I'm at an angle, the edges are smaller and smaller as they go. As they get closer and closer, they widen up like they should. The depth looks like it's appropriate. And they look like there's some sort of space underneath, right? Okay. So that is how to make a very quick floor texture in Photoshop, so you can bring it over into your game engine. All right. Next time we'll be making a brick wall to finish up these walls. Okay. Thank you, and have a good one.